Welcome back to Bunch of Apes podcast, where I'm your host, Sam Harris, and it's kind of my personal journey in educating myself in a topic that I am very interested in, but have no expertise in at all. So I'm kind of using this as an opportunity to meet people that do. And one of those people that I'm very delighted to be able to meet up with is Dr. James Dilley. Hello, James.
Hi, Sam.
Now, we've actually met before. A few times, well, virtually. For those of you that aren't aware, the Bunch of Apes podcast was available in a previous guise, which was kind of me just meeting anyone and everyone that would talk to me about anything. And now I've tried to sort of specialize that down and just focus on my main topic of interest, really. So we had a few conversations in the past, because I think the last one we had, you were kind of trying to imagine me with a wig on as a female Neanderthal. I don't know if you remember that one.
I think that was very much your story that you were running with. That was me thinking, where on earth is this podcast going?
Yeah, no, you're right. That was entirely my creation. You were just kind of there begrudgingly along for the ride in that point. But no, we're not going to go down that road just too much on this episode. But I guess because I am starting again, I was quite interested to just go back over your story, your career, and how you got into what you're doing now and what it is you are doing now. So you're now a doctor of
archaeology,
and from what I remember, your PhD was in the use of javelins in hunting. I'm sorry, I can't remember in which era that would be.
Yeah, it's pretty much it, but during the early part of the Upper Paleolithic.
Upper Paleolithic. So when would that be in terms of timescales, Upper Paleolithic?
So the Upper Paleolithic runs into the end of the Old Stone Age that we know as the Paleolithic. The section that I'm interested in, because it's so long, and it's worth pointing out that the Paleolithic is the longest part of the human timeline. It's longer than all the others put together, and even if you multiplied them by several times. So it's been broken down into three sections: the Lower Paleolithic, the Middle Paleolithic, and the Upper Paleolithic. My interest area for my PhD thesis was in the Upper Paleolithic. But even the Upper Paleolithic is quite a few, several thousand years long. So even that's broken down into sub-periods depending on technology and markers of different groups of people. And I was interested in a group right at the start, and that sub-period is known as the Orignation. And these are thought to be some of the first modern humans into Europe.
Okay. So that with the Orignation, would that be sometimes referred to as Cro-Magnon, or is that a
That's a very outdated term.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Huh. How come? What changed? What was it?
I'm not sure what the push behind changing it was. I guess it wasn't a particularly scientific term, really, because they're just modern humans. They're just Homo Sapiens.
I see. So it was kind of maybe almost sounded like it was differentiating them as different species, but they weren't at all. They were just modern.
Yeah. And I think there was sort of some paper and tabloid rhetoric that was suggesting that Cro-Magnons were somehow not as intelligent as modern humans in some way. So I guess it was sort of in some way potentially a mildly offensive term somehow, but it was just quite an antiquated term anyway. So the correct terminology these days is anatomically modern human, but most people just say modern humans.
Okay. And what was the what was the name? The
Orignation.
Orignation. So that's when modern humans started to move into Europe.
Yeah, so it's a fascinating time, really, because Neanderthals have lived in Europe for a really long time, and they have lived in some very cold environments and environments that have warmed up as well. We're starting to get to the point where Neanderthals are really on the decline, and of course that's a big mystery in archaeology as to why they actually declined. We don't know whether it's because of disease, climate change, but there's probably a whole number of factors. And as soon as their numbers start to dwindle quite rapidly, their gene pool gets smaller. We're pretty certain that there would have been modern human Neanderthal relations, because unless you're from sub-Saharan Africa, you will have a small amount of Neanderthal DNA in you, some more than others. And I think we've spoken about that before, we won't go into. But for this time in the Orignation, you've got large groups of people who seem to be coming from the Levant area through into Bulgaria and westwards into Europe. Although there's a recent paper out pushing back the Orignation evidence in Portugal back by 5,000 years. And I guess that's a good point to throw in a couple of dates about the Orignation. That it starts around, depending on where you are in Europe, roughly around 40,000 years ago, although there is some sway either side of that. And that keeps getting pushed back to 41, 42, 43,000 years ago. And the Orignation ends around 30,000 years ago, but again, there's some sway either side of that. So it's a good 10,000 years worth of Orignation. And it's quite interesting because these people come into Europe that would have been very, very cold. I was interested in Northwest Europe because you have to specialize for a PhD. You can't just do everything because it would be a very long PhD and you really need to focus and specialize. And I was interested in Northwest Europe. Now, the downside of Northwest Europe during that time is that even in central France in the summer, in July, the average temperature would have been 5 degrees. So pretty cold. There probably would have been some sway again, either side of that. When you're working off organic data like that, there's always going to be some sways and outliers. So it's not necessarily exactly, but we still know it's very, very cold.
So no one's going on holiday to the south of France back then?
No. I mean, I guess they might have been going on holidays to southern France or Italy or even into northern Iberia, but they would have been going from a cold to a temperate climate rather than into a warm environment we know today. So, if they were taking walks on the beach, it would have been with a reindeer skin jumper and, a nice warm cup of hot reindeer blood rather than cocoa, I guess.
Whether you get away with that in Calais anymore.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess for people in France have a somewhat similar diet to upper Paleolithic hunter-gatherers, because you get a lot of horse meat being consumed in France, and they would have been eating a lot of horse in the upper Paleolithic. But for the Orignation, they specialised in reindeer. They ate loads and loads of reindeer, and some of the French cave sites have, I think it's a near 98% representation of reindeer out of all the faunal remains. So that is specialization.
Right.
But they're making their spears with, presumably a wooden haft and a reindeer antler tip. And it was that I was interested in, because why would you make a spear tip out of reindeer antler when beforehand you'd use stone tips, and later in the Gravettium, which is the next time period, they went back to using lithic stone tips again. So the Orignation has this real consistency of using antler spear tips, and specifically antler spear tips that have a little split in the base of them. So they went, that's quite interesting.
Stone tips to antler and then back to stone.
Yeah.
Okay.
They do reappear again. You do get antler spear tips disappearing and reappearing. But in the Orignation, it's very consistent and over a huge geographic area as well. We're not talking sort of one side of France. You get these antler tips appearing. You can find them all the way from Portugal all the way through to Bulgaria and north and south of that. That's a huge, huge area. And I was just interested in why. Why would you use antler rather than stone? Because an antler spear tip takes a long time to make. It means that you have to invest a huge amount of time in preparing the raw material. And unlike flint, having made loads of flint spear points, you can just knap a very basic pointy rock, really, nothing too specialized, in a matter of minutes. But one of these antler spear points could take easily an hour. So it's a huge investment. But why make them? Well, it's probably because they were worried about the actual spear shaft that I already mentioned. So for that kind of environment, we're thinking about somewhere that's really, really cold. When we think of a really cold environment today, you don't get many trees there unless it's somewhere that has a really wide seasonal range in temperature that allows a little bit of growing season. If it's somewhere that's got low precipitation and few trees, you're not going to get a lot of soil being produced. So you'll just end up with a grassland. So somewhere like Mongolia or Siberia. So very open, very few trees. So to try and have a nice flexible spear shaft is not going to be an easy thing to find, simply because it just doesn't grow there. So something like hazel or ash that we'd think of as the ideal wood just wouldn't grow there. So I was trying to explore whether these antler spear tips that had a split in the base of them meant that you could just have a beveled long piece of wood that you slotted into the spear shaft, and that if there was damage to the spear because it hit a hard surface because you missed the target, then it will be the spearhead that breaks, not the really valuable spear shaft that you wouldn't easily get in the nearby area.
Wow. Okay. And so that was, I guess that's is it the thesis of your PhD?
Pretty much, yeah. Just a lot of exploring the climatic data, contextualizing the Orignation, and testing a load of these replica spears to see if they actually hold weight in that idea.
And did they?
Yeah, consistently. They were actually really, really effective. I was surprised at how effective they were. For part of the test to actually see if they would do enough damage to kill a large mammal, I fired them into ballistics gel, which was it was interesting, but it was a very controlled environment. So you're not out in the real world, but you can't really do that because it's not very ethical. But it gave me a good idea and a good penetration depth in terms of killing an animal with any kind of projectile. A large mammal is around about 20 centimeters, and I think that's a pretty deep wound, but that's to, I guess, give some margin that if you don't hit a vital organ, you're at least going to cause a huge amount of blood loss.
And you can track them.
Yeah, exactly. And these spears were easily doing that, and the spear tips were staying in the wound, and because they had the split on the end, they were just keeping the wound open like a splint. So these animals would have been losing huge amounts of blood very rapidly. So they're really effective bits of kit.
Right. So does that mean then that by doing your PhD, you've kind of proved, I guess we never truly know anything, I suppose, but you proved that is the likelihood as to why they used the likelihood as to why they used antler spear tips for that period was to look after the spear shaft.
Yeah, I mean, we're never going to know for certain, just because that's the way of archaeology and certainly prehistory with a lack of written word. But it certainly gives some idea as to how effective they are. And I think that's perhaps the most important thing, because in previous literature, they were just sort of assumed that A, they could just get spear shafts, and B, that these things would work and they'd knock down an animal and then they'll take the animal back and they'd butcher it and look at this faunal assemblage and these stone tools. And there's quite an important part of the sequence there that wasn't really appreciated or explored properly, which is what I wanted to do.
So you're now going to presumably see things in books where they might give like a brief synopsis of a particular time period, and part of the information in there will be down to the work that you've done.
Possibly, yeah. I'm writing a paper with my PhD supervisor at the moment, and then that's perhaps what we'll see in the future. But it's quite applicable because it's less so of a focus purely on hunting technology and hunting strategy, as much as it is a focus on raw material management and procuring and curating certain materials that you can't get in certain places, and thinking about the implications of that rather than just assuming. And I think the best example to sort of outline why it's important was that a previous study had gone to test a load of these spears in the same sort of way as I did in ballistics gel, but rather than using a species of wood or any kind of spear shaft that was anything like what they had used, they used poplar, dowled poplar. And poplar is matchwood, really. It splits very easily, it's very light. It is probably one of the last types of wood that you'd ever choose for a spear shaft because it would be useless. But it was just like, well, we've got this, so we'll use it. It just immediately means that your data is probably not going to be particularly reliable. So, but yeah, I mean, I guess it's not going to answer a big question because we'll never know, but it's just pointing out the fact that when you're looking at these objects and these people in these sites, you need to try and have a really broad view on these people and the world and their objects.
But so I guess it kind of speaks to something slightly wider than, necessarily looking at the spears, in that, like you say, if you don't fully understand the resources available in that environment, it's quite hard to then imagine how people are acting in that environment. You have to pay real attention because we know that they used spears, but I would never even thought of the idea that actually they're not that widely available in terms of the wood.
And I think that was the problem. It was just a case of, oh, actually, yeah, you're right. When you do look at the environmental data, there probably wouldn't have been many trees there. And it's like, yeah, actually, people couldn't have just burned fires for using firewood just casually because it was cold, because where's the raw material? Where's the firewood? The replenishment rate is too low. I mean, yeah, in some parts of the world, like in Mongolia, they burn animal dung because there's no wood. So they may have been doing that. But some French sites, they were burning low-grade coal that they were finding, again, because there's just a lack of firewood. And quite a few sites, in fact, most of them, they were even burning bone just for the grease and fat in the bone, just to offer some fuel. There must have been so little wood in places that people were really just using the absolute basic materials around them.
What you're talking about is obviously experimental archaeology, is kind of using tools from the past and trying to imagine how they might have been used by replicating the materials. And aside from your PhD, you have been flint knapping from the age of 10, I think it was, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much.
And I mean, how does one get into that? Is that something your dad introduced you to, or someone you knew, or you just saw it on telly? Or
yeah, pretty much. I mean, I've always been interested in making things, and I guess like most young kids, the chance to knock a few nails in a piece of wood with supervision, that's most kids really, and liking Lego and that sort of thing. And then going into primary school, again, like most kids, being sort of caught up with the Egyptians and Greeks and Romans and that sort of thing. And my parents signed me up to the local Young Archaeologist Club in Cambridge. And they used to do holidays quite a few years ago where you'd go to different parts of the UK that would focus on a certain either time period or a type of archaeology. And there were ones to Nottingham where you looked at a medieval cemetery. There was one on Hadrian's Wall where you lived like a Roman soldier and visited a lot of the sites along there. And there was one in Cornwall, which was very prehistory focused. But you also did a lot of experimental archaeology, more experiential archaeology, but having a go at flint knapping, bronze casting, bone working, and just seeing all of these amazing prehistoric sites on the various different moors. And going there, that was my first actual interaction with someone flint knapping. And being from North Hertfordshire originally, and that's where I am now, we get a lot of flint around here, huge amounts of it just in the fields. And it was something that I saw that I could easily potentially do at home. And I say easily in inverted commas because it is not easy.
No.
But you don't need any specialist equipment. You just need the flint and some pebbles and just a pair of gloves and goggles really for that, to put in that safety disclaimer subtly there.
I'm sure you would have been so safe when you were like 10, 11.
Oh yeah. And just tried it and found that it was really, really difficult, but managed to get some really rubbishy, to call them flakes would be generous. But I carried on for some reason, and then had to start scouring the nearby fields for more flint. And then when that resource started to run dry, I had to start looking in local chalk pits, and then that upgraded to actual working quarries to get large amounts of big pieces of flint. And my dad helped set me up a website, AncientCraft, around, I think I was about 16.
Oh wow! So
And
AncientCraft's been going for a long time then.
yeah, well, over
Right.
10 years. I think it's come up to 12 years now.
Wow.
But it wasn't a sort of commercial venture. It was just to show my interest and the sorts of things I did. But I started to get emails from museums saying, could you make us this? Could you come and demonstrate some flint knapping? And I started to become more known within the local museums. And it was a case of, well, 16-year-old, there's a bit of a pocket money opportunity here for something I enjoy. So started to provide displays and make those replicas, and became more and more well known. And then over the years, did my GCSE archaeology in secondary school, and did my A-level archaeology in year 9, which was stressful at times, but it really helped later. And then obviously went to University Southampton to do archaeology. But having that background in flint knapping and that interest was great, because my interview to actually go into the department, they took all the students, and you sat down with a member of staff, and they put an object in front of you and said, can you describe this as an archaeologist might? And I think some students had some pieces of bone, some had pots, and different objects. My interviewer put a flint hand axe in front of me and asked me to describe it. He wasn't really expecting to be told how it was made, what it was for, how old it was, probably where in the world it might have come from, and how much it had been used. And by the end of the interview, it was a case of, well, if you'd like to come here, here's your ticket to come in. And that would be the end of the interview. And I was like, oh, okay.
Excellent.
So yeah, and just carried on, running AncientCraft, doing more and more, and starting to go into the media side of it, working with TV crews for documentaries, either behind the camera or in front of it, working with different kids' books, British Museum, doing displays, making replicas there, Stonehenge. It's just, yeah, it's a really long list. So it's keeping me very, very busy. And then trying to do a PhD at the same time was a bit of a challenge. But yeah, as you said at the start, passed the Viva a few weeks ago. So just a few corrections to do. And then, yeah, that's my education, I guess, on paper is over. The school days are done.
So
many years.
Is that where you're at now? Do you think, well, that's me done with that, I can focus on AncientCraft for a while? Or have you got any other projects you'd like to sort of get off the ground, look into?
Yeah, I mean, there's always research projects which come up that sound interesting. As I said, I've got this paper that's looking at Upper Paleolithic hunting strategy and resource management. I've also got some Bronze Age research projects in the pipeline that I'm starting to construct. But at the moment with these, and I'm sure you and everyone else have heard this phrase hundreds of times, but these unprecedented times.
Yes,
not just times, but unprecedented.
Yeah. Which they're not really, because there's been loads of like pandemics in human history. It's just that we haven't had any, I suppose.
Yeah, these are our unprecedented times. Not any other people in history. These are ours. Not that we want them, but we've got them. But I'm having to shift the way the business works a little bit, because usually during the year, most of my weekends or even whole weeks, I'd be up and down the country, all over the place, doing displays, workshops, and whatnot. Really, it'd just be really busy. And this year, that just hasn't happened. But everything has kept ticking along due to a really nicely redeveloped and overhauled website. Thanks to my very creative and talented partner. But that's brought in a huge audience for people ordering replica objects, either for museums, their own collections, or just personal interest, really. So
I'm going to butt in here, James,
really busy,
because obviously I'm very grateful for your time, and I just want to let people, if anyone is listening, do check out the website and do order some replicas, because I've only had a couple of pieces, and I've sent my mum a long list of stuff that she's very confused about. But I get them out sometimes, and I start sort of looking at these. I think I've got they're flint blades. I don't know what
Yeah.
period they're from again.
So
Is
those
it?
are Upper Paleolithic.
Oh,
Yeah.
there you go. And I'm sort of handling them with awe, and I have to remind myself sometimes these aren't actually from back then, but there's something about the replicas that just tie you into that experience of prehistory. And they're so, the stuff on there is so wonderfully made. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, do check it out, because there's not just tools and blades. There's lots of decorative stuff. There's stuff that I think would look great around the home. I mean, to me, even a Paleolithic hand axe just looks, it's a really nice object anyway. But you've done some in glass and things like that.
Yeah, they've been selling quite well.
Yeah, which I know that's not necessarily based on anything that would have been found, but it's a really nice decorative piece. So,
Yeah, I mean, you have to sort of think about the way that things are marketable, really. And I did get a couple of small requests by friends and family just to make something out of glass. And then again, I say the phrase again, I hope I won't have to say it again, but due to these unprecedented times, there's been this huge impact on museums and heritage centres around the UK because they haven't had their footfall. And one of my favourite sites, Creswell Crags, which is up on the Sheffield-Nottinghamshire border, is a limestone gorge that's got lots of caves in it that were occupied during the Upper Paleolithic, and one of them has Upper Paleolithic artwork in it that you can actually go and see, as well as more recently found witch marks for warding off evil spirits during the Middle Ages. So long history, but really, really rare archaeology has come from this place. That's super, super rare. And as well as a really nice visitor centre, they've been going for years, and I can remember being taken there as a young kid by my dad. And it was only in the last year or so that they've been planning to just run off their own steam and be self-sufficient, after many, many years of sort of managing their finances and not relying purely on grants. And then of all years to, try and tentatively dip the toe into the water, then everything came crashing down. And things were looking pretty bleak for them, basically, and which was really worrying, because as well as just the visitor centre closing down, that has a huge impact potentially on the security of these sites.
What would happen if a place like that closed? Does the land just go up to sale to anyone and they can just build?
No, not as such. It's actually owned by a big estate, who very, very kindly gave them a rent holiday during that period. But because they've always got sites and tours there, it means that people can't easily break into either the caves or that sort of thing. It's always been looked after. And it also just brings a huge amount of awareness to people about this really rare archaeology. And then again, sort of people my age or any age really, it helps them find a center or a place that they can research and look at this sort of thing, because they keep a lot of the objects there. It isn't just sort of a visitor center where you buy your tea and coffee. They have an actual research center there where they have a huge amount of the objects that were found there. So there's a level of stewardship as well. But they basically turned around and said, well, look, if something doesn't change, we're going to have to close permanently. And I got in touch and said, well, if there's anything I can do, I'll donate a load of my replicas and my time just to see what I can do to help. And they took me up on the offer and did a charity auction, and had loads of people donate different things, which is where I believe you got your blades from.
It is. It is. I won't even. Well, my wife won't listen to this, so I mean, I was one bid away from dropping far more money than I can afford on the. I think you were doing an event where you'd have. I think it was a whole day of flintknapping at Creswell. And I was so tempted to go at it again, but I just thought this could escalate.
Yeah, for the people who won it in the end, they were prepared to go further, and it was a case of, well, for all that extra money, just donate it straight away. It's all for a good cause. But, I will be doing more workshops there because it went so well. But yeah, and then off the back of all of that, I created the YouTube series that started off on Twitter, Nap Time. And again, just to raise awareness for them, I thought, well, I'll just do some free flint napping tuition online and see, who tunes into these live events. And they went absolutely mad. I think the last time I checked that one of the videos that was just this half-hour video that I'll put up on Twitter, it got 30,000 people watching it.
Wow.
But that may well be more now, I don't know. But it just shows you that, just a guy sitting there whacking a rock and saying, if you hit it here, this will happen, worked quite well. So a YouTube channel appeared out off the back of that. So it's been, even though a lot of people have been working at home and some people have been unfortunate enough to sort of be sat there thinking, what can I do? It was a case of things were still really, really busy at AncientCraft HQ. And are still busy to this day because we're starting to get all the Christmas orders coming in as well now, which is starting to, with this poor weather as well and a new workshop being built that hasn't been finished yet, it means that work is very much dependent on good weather.
Well, yeah, I hope you've had some orders from my mum. I don't want to know what I'm getting, but I'll be very disappointed if she hasn't.
Well, I'll have to have a look to see if there's any orders come in. Not that I'll tell you, but
no.
Yeah, I'll have to have a look.
Well, it'll be from Father Christmas, won't it? So, not from
what
you.
would be the thing that you would choose if you had,
Oh, actually, I gave her a list. If I had infinite resources, and I will just say, they are all very good value because they're such well-made pieces. But obviously, I'm married. I've got a young son. I can't always justify spending too much money. I think the nicest one I saw was you do the polished axe heads in is it in jade or yeah. That's a specialist piece, that. But I tell you what, if you can stretch to that, is just a thing of beauty.
It's the kind of thing you want on the mantelpiece with a sort of dish. Or like a decorated plate stand with the little feet that you can just prop it on. Yeah,
and out of reach from anyone young that could potentially drop it or something like that. Although I'd imagine it's quite sturdy, but
it's quite sturdy. But if it lands on a tiled floor or a stone floor, that's going to be chipped.
Yeah, I think any of the hand axes, because I remember going to a museum where they had. They had replicas that you could hold, and just the feeling of it in your hand. There's something really, I don't know, it's something eerie about the way it fits, which is really nice. Which I was going to ask you about actually, because there must have been something about flint napping between 10 to 16 when you started to get, something from it, and were you? When you're flint napping, is there or I mean, maybe not now, because obviously it's your business. So when something becomes work, there's always an element of, that takes away some of the therapy of it, I suppose. But was there something therapeutic or just
no? It's the opposite.
Okay, stressful now, is it?
Well, it's not stressful. It's just frustrating because at times that you can make these things and that you're good enough, but either you make silly mistakes that just cocks everything up, or the flint will not behave. It's a really hard raw natural material to work with. When you get wood, you might get some knots or some weird things appearing in the wood. But flint is just so unpredictable that it just makes it a nightmare to work with, because as you're working through the rock and taking flake off by flake, that if there's this fossil or crack underneath, you just can't see.
It's gone.
Hit one hit, crack. Or sometimes it will be a case of there's a tiny bit more iron or slightly less silica in the rock, and it means that the actual fracture mechanic and the way that it behaves as you hit it just changes completely for no obvious reason, and it's just so frustrating because that you're doing everything right, but the rock is just like, no, I'm not going to be an axe. I'll be a pile of gravel, but I won't be an axe.
Who would want to be a pile of gravel over being an axe? That just beggars belief. So what? Again, then, what was it? Because you said you sort of you qualified it with like every 10-year-old likes to build things, likes to learn about exciting history and stuff. But I don't know many young people that age that would stick with something quite so niche and hard. I could understand if it was sort of really satisfying to do, but you've put me off it, to be honest. Not that I was probably going to, take it up too intensively, but what was
Yeah,
it
I mean,
about?
I don't know. It's not so easy to clearly outline what were the main draw factors, because I can remember going through it, the first few years and just finding it impossible. And there were times where I'd just sort of throw down my tools and think to myself, I'm not going to carry on with this, I'm giving up. But would always be drawn back to it a couple of days later or so. And I've come across quite a few other young people that have come to workshops that have been about the same age, sometimes a little bit older, from my starting point. And they've just been set on doing it.
Right.
And it's funny how some kids work like that, and that is their thing, and they're going to be good at it. I think the thing that can throw a lot of people off it is either the difficulty and the determination of it, or the environment around them and the people around them. Because I can remember being in school and kids taking the mickey because it's like, why are you bashing rocks? And I guess the frustrating thing was that you couldn't turn around like I can now and say, because I'm making this beautiful thing that's absolutely perfect. Because back then you're still learning, and the idea of even making something near perfect was beyond. So I guess the environment probably has a big factor of that. And if it's for young people, if it's not deemed cool or in any way accepted, then I guess it's just dropped away. And I still, from friends from school that I occasionally meet up with, they'll still joke about when I'd be bashing rocks and that sort of thing. And it's like, yeah, but not in a nice way, obviously, but it's just one of those things that I stuck with, really. And it is very, very unusual. There's so few professional flint knappers in the UK that almost purely live off it. There's a few that are a bit older than me. I say a bit older, actually, a reasonable bit older. But in 20 years' time or so, if there's been no one else that takes it up to a professional level, and if I have an unfortunate accident, that'll be it. There'll be no professional British flint knappers anymore. They'll all be gone. And it's as simple as that. It is quite literally a fragile craft. But the investment to learn to get to a competent level is just ridiculous. The time required and the determination and the sheer amount of raw material, the kilos and kilos of raw material. I mean, it's not like bronze casting that, you can buy in some charcoal as the fuel and it burns away, or some bronze, and if you duff it up, you just melt it down again and start again. With flint knapping, you start with huge rocks and you break them, and you've still got all of that volume of waste material. So what do you do with that? So I can imagine that, for young people that are in that setting at home, that they're trying to learn how to do some flint knapping, if they're producing huge amounts of waste, and parents are thinking, what are we going to do with all this waste, and sort of discouraging them away from it. I can imagine a huge amount of environmental factors that are putting people off, which is a shame. But it's one of those such unusual things that it's quite hard for most people to compartmentalize.
Well, hopefully, if we can just inspire one person through this podcast to take it up at a young enough age, then it's been worthwhile.
How many young listeners do you have?
Well, I don't have any at the moment. How long do you think it would take then for someone to be competent?
That's a difficult one, really, because again, there are so many variables. But
I've got a 10-month-old now, so I've got some time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, if you can start them, in the next 4 years or so, I mean, give them a bit of a break. Don't throw them straight into it immediately, because that's a bit unfair. But give them about 2 weeks, and in 2 weeks' time, here's your first pebble, here's your first antler. Now hit that flint. But certainly for a kid around age 10, if they're teaching themselves, I mean, to get competent, I think I took about 6-7 years, I'd say. And then in that past about 8 years or so, you understand the how and why the raw material breaks in the way it does, but it's just the real fine improvements. And you get to a point now where you're pretty much only restricted by the quality of the raw material. If I had the most perfect flint, I could probably come close to making the most perfect things out there. But at the moment, there's just not many quarries that are producing really good quality flint. There was a few years ago, but they've run out of quarrying space. And the quarries that are active at the moment, the flint is really bang average, to say the least.
With the business side of things, is that something that is fairly essential to have a little side? Well, it's not a little side business anymore. It's it's your livelihood. But as an archaeologist, so you said you've got some things in the pipeline, research stuff like that. It's not as glamorous as Indiana Jones, is it? It's not.
No, sadly not.
No. So for someone going into archaeology, then I guess having things that they can do alongside it, would you say that's essential, or does it depend on the?
Yeah, and again, it depends on the individual situation. But I mean, as I was going through university, I still had little part-time jobs along the side, and AncientCraft was still developing. But once you're there, I suppose, and you're having to rely on a proper income, I guess it's a case of managing your finances and working out, how much you need per month. But as a researcher, you can either apply for postdoc grants, which pays for your research and is essentially your wage. But the idea of continually having to worry about applying for the next grant and the next grant and the next grant, for me, was just not something that I needed to worry about among everything else, really. So I'm in that area now. Yeah, I mean, it's just the uncertainty of it. But I'm at that stage now that if there's some archaeology project going where they need a specialist to come in and say, oh yeah, that's this kind of axe, or this is how this would be made, or here's a replica so that you can show visiting people, or just to provide a demonstration, and that's where I come in, and I would be getting paid by those grants, so I don't have to worry about applying for them. I just get paid by them or part of them. And that is just takes away a whole load of hassle out of the equation, really. But I guess for some of the actual academic research that I'm hoping to go into now that the PhD is over, where there are opportunities to apply for grants, then unfortunately, I guess I'm going to have to think about going through that process. I guess more so because a project that could happen without a grant could be even better or more far-reaching, or could have things like community engagement, because for the kinds of research I'm going to be involved in, there's always going to be that practical side of making something or testing something, and I was quite interested in exploring the way, for example, that people might have made charcoal in the Bronze Age, and that might seem like a very niche thing, but the charcoal that people used in the Bronze Age obviously fueled the production of bronze and the smelting of copper. But the Bronze Age wouldn't have existed without charcoal. So it's quite a key ingredient in the process, really. But again, it's just sort of a raw material that's assumed, people made charcoal. Well, how did people make charcoal? How much time did it take to make charcoal? What was it, this surprisingly crazy investment of time? Did it mean that hundreds of people had to be involved, or hundreds of work hours? And did it have a massive environmental impact on the local landscape because they had to keep cutting down loads and loads of trees? We don't know. So it might be a good opportunity to be based somewhere and apply for a grant that you get loads and loads of people in the local community to have a go knocking down trees with bronze axes and go through that charcoal burning process. Because I guess as well as actually building research data, you're actually outputting experiences as well that might encourage those people coming in to think, oh yeah, I quite like this, I might do this a bit more. So that's the kind of research that I'd like to do that has output, so that people can engage with it. Because if you just write papers and sit in your office constantly and don't try and engage with members of the public who might have more of a passing interest, then I don't know, you're making archaeology less accessible, because that information will filter out slowly, but not as directly as it could do. You know, why not make it easier and more interesting? You know, not just for your academic peers. Have that sideline that can go straight to the members of the public, because archaeology is really fueled by public interest and very little else.
I think that's growing. I mean, certainly in the last, in the last few years, I'd say there's a lot more mainstream archaeology on TV, things like that. James, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I'm kind of finishing these off with some quick fire questions occasionally. Sure. All right, so I'm going to put you on the spot with a few. Well, they might not be that quick fire. You don't have to answer quick fire, to be fair. What's your favourite era of prehistory?
That's a very tough question, and depending on who's listening to this, there's potentially going to be people who are very offended that I might, I'm not saying I am, but I might turn around and say something like the Bronze Age is my favourite, which, considering I did possibly many of my peers in Southampton who are very Paleolithic focused, and my main supervisor who's a specialist in Upper Paleolithic technology, and anyone involved in my PhD thesis, which was focused on the Upper Paleolithic.
So we won't say that then. We won't.
But I didn't say that. That was just an example.
Just in case. Okay. So you're going to go with Upper Paleolithic then, obviously.
Well, but then again, because I've been working with places like the Museum of London on the Havering Hoard, and you know, for many of the people involved in that project, they might think, well, but you were so focused on the Late Bronze Age, and you know, you do so much with that. Well, yes, I do. So, I think I'll just say that my favourite period is the early to mid stages of prehistory.
Oh, wow. You could be a politician.
That's very open. Yeah.
All right. Well, here's the next question then, which is made harder by your general answer. But if you could go back to the early to mid stages of human prehistory, but you could go back with say your friends or your partner or your nearest and dearest, but you could never come back again. But you could go back to have a look, but you have to stay there. Would you?
No.
No. Okay. You'd rather not know for definite.
No. The idea of constantly being in a state of clothes feeling a bit damp is not ideal in my eyes. And you know, the thing is having having worn the replica clothes and done all the activities, you know, they work and they're very effective, but when the weather's rubbish, you know, everything's just a bit miserable. You know, today it's miserable. You can just retreat inside and, you know, just sit up our laptops and, you know, stick Netflix on and the lights and, you know, rely on Wi-Fi.
What if you could take a little like suitcase with you of stuff that was, you know, modern?
Well, yeah, I guess that's you'd have to think carefully about those modern things though, because if they were powered by electricity or internet, then they're not going to last very long.
No, so, but a hoodie might come in handy.
Yeah, but you could make a hoodie in the Bronze Age. You know, you'd be bringing these ideas back, I suppose. So you know, you'd have to think carefully.
That's what I mean.
But
you'd be like.
I often think about, you know, if. Well, yeah, I guess so. You know, you might be able to live really, really well. Who knows? But I often get asked and think about, you know, if you could go back into prehistory to watch something and come back to sort of report on what you'd seen, what would it be? And having thought about this, people have sort of suggested, what would you go to Stonehenge to find out what it was actually for? And I think for many people, like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. But there's a problem with that. And it's that if you go back with your one chance to go back in time, and it can be any time, but if you go back to Stonehenge or somewhere like Stonehenge, and all they're doing is doing exactly what archaeologists think they were doing, what a waste of an opportunity. Like, oh, yeah, they're doing these things. I can just say, yes, they were doing them. But if you did go back in time and they were doing something totally ridiculous, or it was built by aliens, no one would believe you anyway. So yeah, that's true. Either way, it's lose-lose. I think if I could go back in time and come back, I'd probably go to some part of the Bronze Age so that I could watch certain things being cast. So I could be like, oh yeah, that's how they do it. Come back, right? Do that for myself. Because there's just such limited evidence. You know, we don't get bronze furnaces. I've had to use wooden tongs to pick up 1,000-degree crucibles to pour into a mold, and these tongs immediately set on fire, and the flames start going up towards your hand very rapidly. And again, you might think, well, why don't you make bronze tongs? But bronze tongs for picking up molten bronze, not a good idea. They won't last very long. So yeah, there are problems there.
The other difficulty with going back, because obviously dating's not exact, is it always? So could you end up going back to like what you thought was when they built Stonehenge, and then you'd missed it by a couple of years, and the people are like, oh, we've no idea why they built it. You know, you'd be in the same boat as you are now, kind of thing.
Yeah, but you know, if you put yourself within one of the main phases of its use, then you'd probably be all right. But yeah, I mean, if you're going for some specific date to see a particular object being put somewhere, so you'd be like, oh yeah, I know where that's buried, then yeah, that's pretty dangerous.
Your range of knowledge really does span across all of the Stone Ages. So I think it'd be good to get you back and pick your brains again. But for now, where
Jack
can
of all trades, master of none?
Well, yeah, you say that. I mean, I'd say master of flintknapping. You could give yourself that.
All right, one tick then.
Yeah, maybe more. Okay, so where can people go to find your stuff?
Well, they can go to AncientCraft.co.uk, but I'm also on social media, which is where you'll see my most up-to-date adventures and work, and you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at AncientCraft UK.
Mm-hmm. And the YouTube series is called Nap Time. It's also on Instagram.
Yeah. Again, if you just search AncientCraft UK or James Dilley, Nap Time, or anything like that, it will probably come up.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, thanks for joining us, James, and hope to get you back again soon. And thank you to everyone listening. If you have any questions or ideas or comments or feedback, or people that you know and would suggest coming on the podcast, then the email address is bunchofapes@gmail.com. And again, you can find us on all the usual social media platforms under Bunch of Apes as well. All right. Thank you, everyone, for listening.